candle had burned almost down to nothing. It guttered against the stone wall of the small cell, and the old monk did not see the light. He had not seen the light for many years. His eyes were two pale moons that no longer held the world. And yet, on that night, he saw. He saw a man walking across a grey water. The water was wider than any sea he had ever crossed in his youth, and on the far side of that water stood a city of glass, with towers that climbed into a sky he could not name. From that city a young man walked out. He wore the black habit of an Augustinian, the same order that had given the monk his bread and his prayers for 60 years. And the young man kept walking, across mountains, across deserts, across the silver line of the sea. He walked until he reached the place where shepherds keep the flock. And then the old blind monk saw the white robe come down over the young man's shoulders. He saw a balcony and a crowd and a name he had never heard spoken in his lifetime. He whispered the name into the dark, and the candle finally went out. That is how the story has come down to us. We do not know if it happened exactly like that. We do not even know with the kind of certainty that historians demand that the blind monk is one man at all. He may be many monks, many quiet lives, many small visions stitched together by the people of God across the long centuries. The church has always carried its prophecies the way a grandmother carries an old photograph. She does not always remember the names on the back, but she remembers the faces, and she remembers what the faces were trying to tell her. If you have ever felt that the world is being given a sign, and that almost no one is reading it, stay close. This is for you. And if a single sentence here moves something inside you tonight, leave one word in the comments so that the others who are listening will know they are not alone in what they are feeling. For now, picture the cell again, picture the candle, and picture behind the candle a long line of men and women who, over the last 400 years, have said almost the same thing. They said that one day a pope would come from very far away, farther than Rome had ever looked, from across the great water, from a land the old world had not yet imagined when Peter walked into the city of the Caesars. The Catholic tradition is full of such voices. Some of them are well documented. Some of them belong to that strange middle country where popular devotion and private revelation walk together. To understand why so many faithful are now whispering the name of Leo, the 14th Pope, to bear that name, we have to begin not with him, but with them. We begin with a woman in a small German village. Her name was Anne Catherine Emmerich. She was born in 1774 in a farmhouse in Westphalia, the fifth of 9 children. Her parents were poor. She worked in the fields before she could read. She entered the Augustinian convent at Dulmen when she was almost 30, and she stayed there until the convent was closed by the suppression of religious houses during the Napoleonic years. She was, by every account that has survived, a woman of extraordinary suffering and extraordinary peace. She bore the marks of the wounds of Christ on her hands and feet. She lay in bed for the last 12 years of her life, eating almost nothing and seeing. She saw a great deal. She saw scenes from the life of Jesus that later inspired books and films and pilgrimages. She saw the house in Ephesus where, she said, the Mother of God had ended her earthly days. She saw the church in the future, and what she saw frightened her and consoled her and made her weep. On a night in May of 1820, 5 years before she died, she described 2 churches. One was the old church, the true church, the church that Peter had built. The other was a dark church, a counterfeit, full of strange teachings and strange faces. She saw heretics of all kinds flocking into the city of Rome. She saw the Pope of the true church living in great distress in another palace, receiving only a few who still came to him. She saw the religion of Christ pushed back into farmhouses and into families, and she saw that God would protect those families through every horror that was coming. And she saw something else. She saw a Pope who would come in a later time from very far away. The words that have been handed down are these: a Pope from the far country, a stranger to Rome, a man brought to the chair from across the seas. She did not say America. The word, as we use it today, would have meant little to a German nun who had never traveled more than a few miles from her village. But she said far. She said the far side. She said a place that the old Christendom had almost forgotten was even part of the world. We have to be careful here. Anne Catherine Emmerich was beatified by Pope John Paul II in 2004. The Church declared her holy. But the Church also made it clear at the time of her beatification that her sanctity was the reason for her honor, and not the visions that the German poet Clemens Brentano had written down at her bedside. Brentano was a man of imagination. He may have added here and there what he wished she had said. Even Vatican examiners have admitted that it is no longer possible to separate with perfect certainty the voice of the nun from the pen of the poet. And yet the tradition remains. The tradition of a pope from across the great water has not gone away. It has only grown louder, generation by generation, as the world has become wider and stranger and closer to the kind of hour that the mystics were always pointing toward. There is another voice, a voice from Italy, a voice from a little town called Calabria in the south, where the mountains come down almost to the sea. The voice belongs to Blessed Elena Aiello, a religious sister who lived from 1895 to 1961. She founded a community of nuns. She bore the wounds of the Passion as Anne Catherine had borne them. She spoke in the last years of her life of a Russia that would scourge the world, of a Rome that would tremble, and of a Pope who would suffer in his own house for the sake of the faith. She did not name a country of origin for the Pope she saw, but she said the Church would be brought low. She said it would seem for a moment that everything was lost. And then she said something gentle. She said that God had already prepared the man who would help his Church to rise again. And she said that man was not yet known to the world. There is another voice, a voice from a small village in Venezuela called Betania. The voice belongs to Maria Esperanza of Betania, a woman born in 1928 in the state of Monagas, in the eastern lowlands of South America. She was a wife. She was a mother of 7 children. She was also a mystic. She had visions of the Mother of God beginning in her childhood. In the 1970s and 1980s, she began to be known throughout the Catholic world for apparitions that took place at a grotto in Betania. The Bishop of Los Teques, after careful study, declared the apparitions worthy of belief in 1987. The Church does not declare such things lightly. Maria Esperanza spoke often of a great crisis in the Church. She spoke of a coming time when the faithful would feel abandoned. She spoke of a Pope who would come, she said, from the new lands. From the lands that Columbus had crossed the ocean to reach. She did not give a date. She did not give a name. She only said that this Pope would be a man of bridges, a man of two worlds, a man whose feet had touched both the old soil of Europe and the red earth of the South, a man who knew what it was to live among the poor of the new continent, a man, she said, who would not look like a king. He would look like a shepherd who had come down from the hills. These are the voices that the Church remembers. There are others too. There is the tradition that grew up around Padre Pio, the Capuchin friar of San Giovanni Rotondo who died in 1968. People who knew him and people who only thought they knew him have left many sayings attributed to his lips. We must be honest, not all of those sayings can be verified. Some of them are devotional embroidery added by the faithful in the decades after his death. But there is one current that runs through almost all of the Padre Pio stories. He spoke again and again of a great purification that would come to the Church. He spoke of a darkness that would fall upon Rome. And he spoke of light returning to the Church from a place that in his lifetime was still a missionary land. A place his Capuchin brothers were still being sent to as foreign priests. A place across the ocean. And then there is the figure of the blind monk. He is the strangest of them all. His story does not have the careful documentation that surrounds Anne Catherine Emmerich. It does not have the diocesan investigation that lifted up Maria Esperanza. The blind monk belongs to oral tradition, to the kind of memory that Catholic peasants and old religious sisters carried from village to village before the world learned to write everything down on a screen. In the devotional circles of the mid-20th century, especially in the small Augustinian houses of central Italy, a story began to circulate. It was the story of an old, blind Augustinian brother who, sometime around the year 1969, had received a vision in his cell. He saw, the story said, a future successor of Peter who would not be from Europe. He saw a young man then still walking the world without the slightest idea of what was coming. The young man was an Augustinian. He wore the black habit. He spoke the language of the New World, and he would one day take the name of a Leo. We must say plainly, there is no parish register that proves this monk existed. There is no diocesan archive that records the vision. The story may be true in every detail. The story may be a popular legend, woven over coffee and rosary beads, the way so many of our holiest traditions began. What matters for our purposes is that the story is old. It did not appear in the last 5 years. It did not appear after a newspaper headline. It was being told quietly, in retreat houses and in old parishes, long before any cardinal from Chicago had even been ordained a priest. That is what makes the year 2025 so strange. On the evening of May the 8th of that year, in the city of Rome, white smoke rose from a chimney that the world had been watching for 2 days. The bells of St. Peter's began to ring. The crowd in the square turned its face upward. And from the central balcony of the basilica, a man stepped out who, until that hour, had not been considered the frontrunner by any of the annalists. His name was Robert Francis Prevost. He had been born on the 14th of September in the year 1955 in the city of Chicago, in the state of Illinois, in the United States of America. His father was of French and Italian descent. His mother was of Spanish descent. He had grown up in a Catholic neighborhood, served at the altar as a boy, and entered the novitiate of the Order of St. Augustine in the city of St. Louis in 1977. He had studied mathematics and philosophy at Villanova. He had gone to Rome for his licentiate in canon law. And then, in 1985, he had been sent to a missionary post in the Augustinian house at Chulcanas, in the region of Piura, in the country of Peru. He stayed in Peru for many years. He learned the language, he walked the dirt roads. He served as a parish priest, as a seminary teacher, as a judicial vicar. He was elected the head of his Augustinian province there. Later he became Bishop of Chiclayo, a city in the north of Peru, where the wind blows hot off the desert and the poor are very poor. In 2023, Pope Francis called him to Rome to lead the dicastery for bishops, which is the office that helped choose new bishops for the Latin Church across the world. A few months later, Francis made him a cardinal. And then, in May of 2025, after the death of Francis, his brother cardinals chose him to be the next pope. He chose the name Leo. He took it, he said, in honor of Leo XIII, the pope who, at the end of the 19th century, had written the great encyclical on the working man. He took it, he said, because the world was entering a new industrial revolution, this time driven by machines that think, and the church needed to speak to the worker once again. But the faithful who knew the old traditions heard something else. They heard the name of a lion. They heard the name that had been whispered in the Augustinian story of the blind monk. They heard the syllables that generations earlier the mystics had only been able to circle without ever pronouncing. A man from across the great water, an Augustinian, a missionary in the south, a shepherd from the new lands, a pope from a country that did not exist when Peter went to Rome, a pope who would take the name of a Leo. You can do what you wish with these correspondences. You can call them coincidence. You can call them confirmation. The Church herself does not require you to believe any private revelation, even the ones she has approved. Private revelation is a gift offered to the faithful, not a doctrine imposed upon them. We are bound to believe in the gospel and in the teaching of the apostles and in the sacraments by which Christ has chosen to remain with us. We are not bound to believe in any monk, any nun, any village mystic, any far country. And yet, the strange thing, when you sit quietly with all of these voices, is how often they agree. Not in the details which differ, as one would expect, but in the shape of the thing. They all saw a church passing through a long winter. They all saw a city of Rome being shaken in its foundations. They all saw the faithful pushed back into their kitchens and their farmhouses, made small again, made hidden again, made to look like the early Christians in the catacombs. And they all saw, at the end of that winter, a man coming from very far away, a man who had walked among the poor of a continent the old Christendom had once forgotten, a man who would not look like a king, a man who would look like a shepherd who had come down from the hills. What does it mean for us tonight, sitting with our beads in our hands, wondering whether the world is collapsing or whether the Lord is doing something new? It means first that we are not abandoned. The same God who spoke through a German nun in a closed convent in 1820 is the same God who is speaking through the church today. He has not gone silent. He has not forgotten the promise he made to Peter. The gates of hell will not prevail. They have not prevailed. They will not prevail. It means, second, that we should not be afraid of the strangeness of the hour. Many of the faithful who are now in their 70s and their 80s were taught when they were small that a pope could not come from outside Europe. They were taught that the chair of Peter belonged to a certain kind of culture, a certain kind of language, a certain kind of robe. And now, in the evening of their lives, they have lived to see something the old catechisms never imagined. An American on the throne of Peter, a missionary from Peru raising his hand over the city of Rome, a son of the New World telling the Old World to be brave. It means, third, that the prophecies of the mystics are not finished. They were never meant to be a calendar. They were meant to be a compass. The compass is pointing now to a church that must become small again, in the best sense of that word. Humble, poor, close to the working man, close to the grandmother praying in her kitchen, close to the immigrant in the field, close to the dying in their beds. The kind of church that the blind monk, if he ever lived, would have recognized when he opened the eyes of his soul on that long ago night. The candle in his cell went out, but the vision did not go out. It traveled through the silent corridors of monasteries. It traveled through the worn pages of devotional books. It traveled through the lips of grandmothers teaching their grandchildren how to bless themselves. And it has come, at last, to you. To this hour, to this quiet moment when you are listening, and the room around you is still, and somewhere in your heart you already know that what your grandmother told you about the saints was true. The Pope from across the great water has come. The shepherd from the hills has come down. The lion is in Rome, and the small hidden church of farmhouses and rosaries and tired old hands folded in prayer is still here, exactly where the mystics said she would be, waiting, watching, faithful, loud. Keep your lamp trimmed, keep your candle lit. The night is long, but the morning has been promised. And the one who promised it has never broken his word.